So camera, like that. Hi guys, Alan here, and
Rachel?
so today we're going to tell you a little bit about our story. So where would you like me to start?
What was your first business?
Wow, my first business was a company called Swizzle Sticks. Yeah.
Haven't heard this one.
Yeah, so, and it was basically cocktail making courses in Dublin.
Nice.
So the swizzle sticks are the two sticks that you put into your glass to swirl around your drink.
Okay.
So that was my first business, Swizzle Sticks. We ran a 7-week cocktail making course in conjunction with Absolute Bombay and Captain Morgan Rum, I think, were the 3 brands that we worked with. And we used to have 10 people in a class, and we'd teach them how to make cocktails.
Okay.
Over 7 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. Monday nights, yeah, it was good fun.
So that was in Dublin. What year was that?
That was Dublin, and I'd say it was around 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're
now.
obviously from Dublin.
I'm a Dub, yeah, Raheny, Dublin.
So then from that, I suppose, why did you move from that business?
Why did I move from that? At the time, that was a part-time business for me because I had a job as a restaurant manager in a cocktail bar restaurant, which was on South William Street in Dublin, and I was there for 2 years. And a friend of my dad's actually was involved in a hotel purchase as a consortium, and that was around 2001. And he asked me would I be interested in coming down to manage the hotel, run the hotel.
Coming down to
Drummondere, so just up on the lake.
which is about 20 minutes from Birdhill?
About, probably half an hour really.
Okay.
There's a beautiful drive from Birdhill out the back road in through Ballina and over the lookout, and you see the whole of Lough Derg. Lough Derg is something like 25 kilometres at its widest point, is that right? Anyway, it's a huge span. And so when you go to take that back road from Birdhill to Nina, and you see the lookout, it's a beautiful vista over the whole river, lake. So you see the River Shannon joining into Lough Derg and then going all the way up north. So it's a super
beautiful,
So came down there, left Dublin in I think it was 2000, maybe 2001, and came down to Birdhill, came down to Drummondere, and then got involved in a hotel project there.
So started your career in the hospitality industry?
Yeah, I suppose that was my first real step into a big project like a hotel or something that I had a ownership in. Myself and my wife then, Lisa, came down to run that project, and we came down originally as managers, but then we ended up being part owners with a small consortium. So that was challenging. They say the smaller the hotel, the harder you work. So that was...
Because you had a small team.
I suppose we probably would have had about 20 members of staff.
Right.
But when it's a small business like that, you're doing everything, So you're the chef in the mornings. You could be the barman in the evening time. You're also the person that checks in the guests. You do the payroll. You run the business.
Yeah.
So it was a small business. So that's what it takes.
Okay, and the reason might be obvious of why you left that, but why did you finish up in Drummondere in the hotel then?
We finished up in the hotel. We were there for, I think, 3 years. We were on a 3-year contract, and at the time there was a small team of owners. So we were at 10%. We had a 10% ownership, and everybody else then combined had a 90%, and they were all locals, and we were the blow-ins, I suppose. So we got to a point after year 2 that the way it would work is that we would have we'd review our accounts at the end of the year, and it just seemed to be taking more money than we had anticipated for the project, but we didn't have the money to invest like the other guys, and we really felt that it really needed a lot more of an investment than we could even put into it ourselves, and that they weren't realistic with the numbers at the time.
Okay.
So when we were looking at the end of a season that we needed 100,000 maybe to invest, really what we needed was 250,000 to really drive the project. So we decided that with our last 20,000 euros really, that we had access to, that we would be better off doing something for ourselves, 100% for ourselves, rather than putting it into the hotel project. And there was way too much conflict and way too many opinions, and we didn't really feel we had ownership of where the vision was going and how to take it there. So we decided to surrender our interest in that and step back and do something for ourselves. And that was in 2003.
2003.
Yeah.
And I suppose from this point, from the experience that you had built up, did you know what you wanted to get into next? Did you know what your next project was?
We felt at the time in 2003 that what was missing in Limerick was a restaurant service style cafe, where at the time every cafe offering or delicatessen offering was you would queue up, take your tray and order over the counter and pay.
Yep.
So that was the deli style cafe offering, and what we wanted to create was more of a meet greet seat setup. So in 2003 we started Delish Cafes, myself and Lisa and another couple, Evelyn and Paddy.
Come say hi.
So we started the Delish Cafes brand, which was 2003, and we opened our first cafe on Thomas Street in Limerick. It was a quick service food solution, and in fairness to Lisa and Evelyn, they drove that project. I was still involved in the hotel at the time.
Okay.
So Lisa and Evelyn would have done all the heavy lifting at the time, and I was involved at the start just with the design, setup, structural design, funding, and fit out. So I was involved in the fit out and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you went from opening a hotel to a cafe, and you swizzled sticks. So where was your background in all this? Why did you think you were
able? So I don't know what made me think I was able or had the. I don't really know what that is. You know, that's an entrepreneurial thing in terms of like the can-do version of that. I suppose in education-wise, I studied hotel management in Old Barracks Roastery, and then after studying hotel management, I studied business studies and marketing in DCU. So they were the two, educationally, that was the background that I had.
Yeah.
So I had a deep interest or a real fondness for hospitality. I started working as a chef when I was 14.
Huh.
Yeah. So my first job was a chef.
Yeah.
And I worked as a chef for 3 or 4 years. Went to work in France as a commis chef with my brother. Then came back and decided I didn't want to work in kitchens. I wanted to be front of house.
Okay.
And that's when I started going to college. I always liked hospitality. I loved food. Didn't realise I had such a graw for coffee.
Okay.
And I think my interest is really in business.
Yeah.
Really in business, but when you get to combine business with something that you like an awful lot, like coffee or people, or seeing other businesses flourish, I think that for me that's really satisfying. It's really like I get huge job satisfaction from what I do.
And then, so was it Delish then where you really identified that it was coffee, that was kind of the route that you wanted to go down?
Not initially. So with Delish, I was involved in Delish until 2009, until Lisa and I separated. And at that time, Delish had opened in Thomas Street, Castletroy, so Thomas Street first, and then in Raheen, over by Courtfields, and then in Castletroy and Adair. So we had 4 locations, or there were 4 locations. And when I was involved in Delish for the last 4, let's say from 2004 till 2009, I wasn't in there operationally at all Lisa and Evelyn ran the operation, but I would have taken care of all the design, fit out designs, managed the builds, so prepared all the drawings, all the visualizations for each unit. So Raheen would have been built from shell and core to the complete build. Castletroy the same twice, because we built Castletroy twice. Adair was pretty much a cafe already, so that was just a refit, and I had nothing to do with that at the time. But I was involved in a company that was fitting out cafes, so I had a full-time job
on the side of opening up these cafes.
Yeah. So I had a full-time job, which was restaurant and bar design and fit out.
Okay. Based in Limerick?
Based in Limerick,
right.
Yeah. So with a company called Abioni, super cool company, would build everything manufacturing. So they would have, I think, about a 5 or 6,000 square foot warehouse.
Okay.
Must be bigger. I actually think it must be 40,000 square foot, because it's massive when I'm looking at the scale of this building. So I was with Abioni for 5 years, up until 2009, and involved in a couple of hundred cafe and restaurant and bar and hotel schemes, doing room designs, and I suppose leveraging off my experience of working in cafes and owning them, and running a hotel, of understanding how the ergonomics of the space should work, and the flow and the customer experience, instead of so I'd be designing them from that perspective, instead of designing them on a blank plan of going, well, this is where everything needs to go, because that's the way the architect might look at it. So I always found that there was a gap between what an architect would design aesthetically and how a cafe or restaurant should work in practice. So so I spent 4 or 5 years with Abioni, I suppose, filling that gap and designing cafes and restaurants for people. And in a typical year, you might design 40 or 50, and I was there with them for 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I studied actually part-time. I did construction studies and 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional design. So that was all from 2005, 2006, 2007. So that was architecture and construction studies.
Right, okay. So that actually brings us on to the next project that you went on to, which kind of incorporates all of your experience from the past into your most previous business, which was coffee culture.
Yeah. So coffee culture started in 2009, and basically at the end of 2008, I think. God, I'm trying to track back my years, but am I really that old? So in 2009, I started Coffee Culture, and the reason behind starting Coffee Culture was that Lisa and I agreed to separate in 2009, at the end of 2008, so to speak. So I had to surrender all my interest in Delish cafes, and unfortunately, I also got made redundant from Abioni.
Right.
Because the recession hit. So I was made redundant from Abioni, and when I went to work in January of 2009, I got paid a retainer instead of my salary. So, and unfortunately, at the time, that wasn't going to cut it. So, €500 retainer instead of my salary was a bit of a shock. So, coincidentally, at the same time, I'd been offered a new role with a company called Corporate.ie, and they were expanding, and they were opening up a Cork office. So I was expecting to take that role. So I was trying to juggle, I guess, my separation, being made redundant, and trying to get the new job over the line, and trying to get paid out of Abioni all at the same time. And so I got made redundant from Abioni, and then I started with Corporate.ie, and I was there 4 weeks, and they went into liquidation. So that brought me up to March of 2009, and then I had nothing really. So I had separated and lost, I suppose, 2 jobs, because I've been made redundant twice in succession of about 6 weeks, and I had nothing. I had just I don't know.
Didn't know where you were
Didn't know
going
where I was going to go.
just-
I'd moved out of the family home.
Yeah.
And had to find a way out, and had to find, what am I going to do now? How am I going to support my kids? Because Lisa and I have a great relationship now, and we just agreed that everything would be 50-50. So that meant I would take the kids half the time, and Lisa would take the kids half the time. And obviously, being from Dublin, I suppose I was a bit in limbo. Would I go back to Dublin?
Yeah.
Because that would have been easy. It was the depth of the recession. There, I didn't know what I should do. Should I start a business, not start a business? Should I just go and I could easily get a restaurant manager job because I had great experience. And I've loads of contacts in the hospitality sector, so I could have done that.
Yeah.
But I decided that what was really important to me was to be near my kids and to spend time in Limerick, and I didn't ever want to pull back on that responsibility of just having to come down and see my kids on the weekend, or not being part of doing their homework, or there when something goes wrong, So I didn't want to lose that bond.
Yeah.
So what I did was I just decided that that was the number one priority, and I needed to build
Around that.
everything else needed to be built around that.
Okay.
So I started Coffee Culture, and what I did was I just literally took out 2 pieces of paper, and I wrote down all the things that I felt I was good at, or that I'd made money at in the past, which was I'd made money at training with swizzle sticks, and I'd made money at designing and building cafes for people, and I'd made money at helping people with their fit outs, and I liked coffee. So they were all the skills, with, I suppose, an interest in architecture, an interest in construction studies, an interest in coffee and hospitality. So they were all the things that I knew I could leverage off.
Yeah.
And then what I needed personally was access to my kids, unlimited money to run a family and to run a home. I needed to be available for my kids whenever that was. So if something happened in school, or Siren got sick in class, that I could drive in and collect her, and I was near. Or if Callum needed to go to a soccer match, that I was available. So they were the things that were really important at that time. And I needed to not have to ask anybody, could I take a day off? So I needed control of my time so I could be available for my kids. So I had these 2 pieces of paper going, okay, this is what I think I'm good at, and this is what's important. So I need to build a business that's going to
marry the two.
Facilitate a lifestyle around these 2 things.
Yeah.
So that's where Coffee Culture started. I said, okay, I'm gonna get into coffee, because I've always had an interest in coffee, and I didn't understand it. And I wanted to create a business that wasn't a coffee, I suppose, the typical coffee company, that we buy coffee and we sell it. And there was a bit of a movement. Stephen Morrissey had just won the World Barista Championships in 2008. So I was aware of that, and there was a bit of a shift in spending. People were drinking less alcohol. They were driving more, and not drinking. Children had just been. The laws around children in pubs had changed, so children had just been limited, I suppose, for a good reason, of what times they could be in pubs till. So that changed the dynamic of how people socialised as well. So there were a lot of things that had happened in around that, the smoking ban, about how people socialise, and about how people spend their me time, and how they're going to find that third space, because it used to be a pub. And so there's a lot of arbitrage or noise around that whole, how do we socialise now? And it doesn't necessarily always have to be alcohol. So I felt that coffee was a good space for me to be involved in, because what was also important was that I had the opportunity to work Monday to Friday and spend the weekends with my kids. So when I was off, I was off. So that was super important. And cafes, to me, looked like they were mostly a Monday to Friday. As a wholesale supplier or as a provider of services to them, I could deal with them on a Monday to Friday, and I'd have my weekends free then to get some personal time, and also to, obviously, when I had the kids, that I could give them 100%. I could be present for them. So that's what started Coffee Culture.
Okay, so like a lot of people listening in now today are listening to find out about the Old Barracks, but Coffee Culture is very much like the sister project, and they can be kind of closely linked. But do you want to just give a bit of a background on what Coffee Culture do, or?
So Coffee Culture is an education and training specialists for the catering industry, the cafe industry, hotels. So what we do is we train baristas how to make great coffee, and we teach cafe owners and restaurant owners and hotel owners how to create a brand standard and how to deliver coffee to that brand standard.
Okay.
So basically we help you deliver a consistent and quality cup of coffee all the time.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Okay.
And that's what we started, and we wouldn't have the old Barracks project if it wasn't for, you know, the turnover that we built up with Coffee Culture and the customer base that we built up with Coffee Culture and the positioning and the brand that Coffee Culture is now. You know, it's almost 10 years old. Okay. So we have a great reputation for quality and standards and attention to detail and systems and procedures and helping people deliver that perfect cup or you know, balanced cup.
Yeah.
And we've been able to leverage. I've been able to leverage off that knowledge and my own growing into the industry and understanding how the industry works, and to fund then this new brand, you know, of creating the Old Barracks Roastery.
The Old Barracks, yeah. So Coffee Culture, you have an academy up in Dublin and also in Birdhill. So why Birdhill?
Why Birdhill? Yes, well, I suppose everything in life is a stepping stone, and Birdhill was what brought me to Birdhill was the building.
Okay.
So this old barracks building, which is 300 years old, and in January of 2015, I was driving by the building and I saw that Browsers, who are the current owners of the building, had a retail store here and they were closing down. And they hadn't got a plan of what they were going to do with the building, but they just were putting, I suppose, the general public on notice that they were having a January sale, and they were closing down. And I think maybe the end of January, I just went into Browsers and I asked them what were they going to do with the building, and would they allow me to open a coffee shop and a coffee roastery, so a cafe and a roastery, and that was my macro level vision of what I wanted to do here.
Okay, so you knew that in 2015 that you would eventually open up a roastery and cafe. Yeah,
and as a mate of mine, Gary Ryan, who when we were trying to do the deal, I always remember Gary saying to me, so there was a lot of I suppose negotiations initially, and Gary just saying to me, just get the building.
Yeah.
Like the building is the story, and he was so right.
Yeah.
And it's funny how you could, like, I would wear my heart on my sleeve a lot, so I talk about a lot of things, and people always solicit advice or look for opinion from people, and sometimes you just get one bit of gold dust from somebody, and you might not expect, but they just might give you a perspective on something that you haven't had.
Yeah.
And Lisa, who runs Delish, was always very good at giving that kind of arbitrary advice, you know, and just going, well, what about looking at it from this point of view, you know, but have you thought of this? And sometimes you just need, like that moment with Gary, you know, that phone call and going, oh, I'm frustrated about this, and he just says, just focus on the one thing, which is getting the building. Yeah. And when you make that decision and nail that, then you can move on with, you know, the next step.
Bigger,
just take that step. Just get the building sorted first, and it'll happen. And be patient, you know. So why Birdhill? Just the building. Saw the building and thought the building was fabulous, and knew that it had space and I could grow into it, and we could create something, you know, and in the long term.
Yeah.
So in terms of combining Coffee Culture and the Old Barracks, what I did back in 2015 was we put Coffee Culture upstairs, and we have been running since 2015 barista training classes, typically 2 or 3 a month, and I have an office up there, which I've been sitting in on my own for the last 2 or 3 years. So all this new members of staff and all the people around is very new to me. So we've got Coffee Culture upstairs, and I've been working since 2015 really on creating this brand and this identity and buying the roaster and getting ready to open this Old Barracks Roastery project. So that's
I think we'll wrap it up there and catch up next week, and we'll see what the vision is for the future with the Old Barracks.
yeah, great.
Thank you.